1.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, June 16th, 2021, and this is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearings. We have 5 cases today. The first case is RPC 16014-007, the property located at 1817 North Quinn Street. We have Mr. Ethan Giddings representing the owner. And Mr. Giddings, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about your property.
Okay, question. Will I have a chance for rebuttal after the department's presentation?
You actually, both sides will have 8 minutes, and then we ask questions, and then you get 1 minute to wrap up, sir.
Great. Okay. So as stated, this is a 64-unit 1950s vintage apartment at 1817 North Quinn. We submitted information to the department, and they made a revision to the assessment based on our information. They have reduced their income pretty much to exactly what the actual income was in 2020. So our main issue remains the expenses for this property. This property is operated between 46 and 49% operating expenses, including real estate taxes. Over the last 4 years, it's been remarkably stable within 1 or 2% change each year. Income has also been stable with market level vacancy averaging around 6%, which I believe is what the assessor has used as well. So the issue really is predominantly the level of expenses. Now, this morning, in reviewing the department's memo for this presentation or this hearing, I did note on the page with the apartment income and expense survey that the assessor in column G has reduced our actual expenses. It's a column titled Appellate Pro Forma, and it's now showing expenses of 36.44% when our actual expenses in 2020 were 49%. And now the only reason I can think of this, and look, this compares fairly closely to the department's expense level of 37%. My concern is that the difference in our actual and what the department is presenting as our pro forma is the amount of real estate taxes for the year. So if the department is taking real estate taxes out of expenses, that means they should be loading the cap rate with the real estate tax rate. And to do that and come up with a 5.75% cap rate means that they're actually starting with a cap rate of 4.5%, which is at best, on a survey from CBRE, Q3 of last year, that's the rate you get for Class A suburban new construction properties with far more amenities than this property has, and far favorable operating costs due to new construction and size of the buildings, which are typically 200 to 400 units. We have a 50s vintage property that's 4 stories, elevator served. Mechanicals are requiring constant maintenance and replacement just due to the age. I will note that in our income and expense that we presented, we have deducted all items out of expenses that would be capitalized, like new appliances, major replacement of HVAC as opposed to repair of HVAC, other items like that. So there are no items in the expenses that should have been capitalized and not reported as an operating expense. So I guess my concern is that if we're not able to include real estate taxes in our expenses and then load those back in at the end by loading the cap rate, then the assessor is using a far below market rate on this property. To say this property has 37% expenses, that's just so far below what it's actually been operating at over the past 4 years. This is an old property. That's what it takes to run this place and retain tenants at the level they have and to maintain the rent levels they have. So it's not an inflated expense level. It may be higher than other newer properties, but that's how it's been since the time of purchase. I do note that on the income and expense survey in the department's memo, at the bottom it does say that the appellant included an expense of $28,195 for replacement reserves, and that the county's cap rate already includes that replacement allowance. That was not indicated in any prior documents we received from the jurisdiction, and I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but it happens to exactly match what the actual what the replacement reserve would have been at 2% based on actual income in 2020. So there's a notation that they've already loaded their cap rate for replacement reserves, but there's no indication that it's been loaded for real estate taxes. So if they're indicating that our actual expenses are 36% rather than 49%, that implies that the real estate taxes have been taken out of the equation, and the tax rate must be added to the base cap rate. So, I guess in summary, if you take that equation and you apply the tax load to the assessor's cap rate, you basically wind up at our number. So, I'm not sure. I think that'll conclude our initial presentation.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Chris Chicas for the county.
Thank you, board members. Thank you, Mr. Giddings. Just to start, I guess, on that note, the guidelines that are presented not only to the board that are available to everybody, they're publicly available, do show on page 9 of the guideline replacement reserves assumed in the capitalization as replacement allowance of 0.2%. We've gone over this with the board in previous meetings. It's on the worksheet that's available to everyone, so that should be no surprise at this point. In regards to the tax load being part of the cap rate, again, that's sort of the basis of ad valorem tax when you're doing property tax assessments. It becomes circular logic to include taxes because, of course, that's what you're trying to find at the end of the day in regards to the real property value is the tax amount. I would just say, you know, as the board is aware by now, we rely very heavily on our summary sheet. As you can see on the summary sheet, we didn't have year 17 available, but in years 18, 19, and 20, echoing Mr. Giddings' account, it's a fairly stabilized property. You know, went up about 1.6%, excuse me, 1.1% in 2020 in the pandemic year. But in that same year, GPI increased by about 3.5%, effective gross by about 2.3%, and operating expenses actually dropped by about 6.4%. We did take the 2020 INE into account. We did a revision, as you can see in column F. And without putting words in Mr. Giddings' mouth, we are very similar. In fact, we're within $2,500 of each other in the net operating income opinion. The biggest difference, of course, is that 95 basis points that Mr. Giddings added to his cap rate. If you were to take the appellant's NOI and cap it at the 5.75, you'd come out with a value within $40,000 of our opinion of value, as indicated in column F. We do believe, obviously, that the cap rate is appropriate. I would point that this is the highest cap rate that is available for mid-rise apartments. This is categorized as 1970 and earlier, but it is a metro property. This is within half a mile of Roslyn Metro. So the walkability index is high, and I assume that's one reason why they were able to increase their gross potential even in the pandemic year. Given the revision we made, given the extremely close net operating incomes between the department and the appellant, we do believe that, again, the clear difference is the cap rate. That the board is familiar with how we apply our cap rates. Again, this is the highest one that was available. It's applicable to the age and the property class code of being a mid-rise. All those things being said, we do believe the county should be confirmed at the revised value of $15,135,500. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Questions from board members, please. Mr. Metzgen.
I have a question for the department on one of the primary aspects that the appellant brought up, namely taking real estate taxes out of expenses and putting them into cap rate. And at the same time saying that the operating expenses were much higher in the 49% or so versus the mid 30% that we see in the I&E in columns B through G. So the question for the department is, did you take the real estate taxes out of their I&E reporting such that the operating expenses went from the high 40s to the mid 30s? Is that why we have such a consistent total operating expense across the board?
That's correct. Yes, the operating expenses are never to include real estate taxes again.
So you hand crank them.
Well, they're reconstructed, but again, we would never include reconstructed real estate taxes or replacement expenses that Mr. Giddings noted.
I know you wouldn't, but they've been reporting them in and you've been taking them out because it's not protocol.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawson, you had a question?
Yeah, for the county, that note at the bottom about the reserve replacement allowance, that reserve is 2%, not 0.2%. Is that correct?
As noted, it's 0.2% of the cap rate.
Is it 2? But it's 2%, not 0.2, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just the way the math works out. It would be 2%. That would be essentially low.
And I remember we discussed this last year. The hotels are always higher. In your opinion, is the 2% normal for residential of this nature, or should it be higher?
This is indicative of what we receive from the income and expense reports. Again, the I&Es include a reserve for replacements allowance below the line. And so that's what we note when we do our analysis every year.
So 2%, in your opinion, is pretty much what everyone does with this nature of real estate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's going to be some difference in the size, the number of units, et cetera, age of the property, but this is what we came up with from our analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No? No, okay. Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Again, fairly limited history, 2018 to 2021. It's very much stabilized in the sense of increasing gross potential in 19 and 20. Again, an increase in effective gross in 20 and a decrease in operating expenses in 2020. Very much in line with the net operating income opinion of value by the appellant. It's just really a matter of the 95 basis points that were added to the cap rate. We do believe that the county should be confirmed at $15,135,500. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Giddings, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Sure. Well, I would say that it's definitely not very well in line with our opinion of value, because we have a problem with the cap rate or the level of expenses if the real estate taxes have been deducted from expenses. To back calculate into a 0.2% deduction or addition to the cap rate for just taking the actual reserve, taking a 2% reserve for replacement and then converting that to a 0.2% change to the cap rate, that implies an even further lower base cap rate. If you're adding real estate taxes and a reserve, then the starting cap rate has to be even lower than 4.5%. So again, it's based on our review of the data and other properties we handle that are far superior and more efficient and larger and newer. A cap rate of 4.5% as a base rate is just not applicable for this property. Our expenses are not 36%; they're 49%, 48%. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, it's just among the board members. What's everybody think? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and start. Chris certainly knows that through the years I've questioned, should you take out the real estate taxes? Should you have a higher reserve? And I've questioned that, but I now have kind of come around to the way the county does this, and I know the applicant doesn't agree with this methodology, and yet it's been demonstrated the last few years I've been on this, that when these properties do in fact sell, the way the county does this is really pretty accurate. And so having analyzed this, looked it over yesterday and listened to it today, I think the county's on. I think they're right on in this particular case.
Okay, thank you. Other folks? Mr. Penaranda.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think the original assessment was a bit aggressive from the county, at the beginning of the year. But based on the numbers from last year, I think they did a very good job recreating and reconstructing the numbers. And, I've tried to look at all the cap rates that comparing to last year's and everything that we've been provided. And, it is the highest cap rate that they have for mid-rises. And I don't really see where we could make any changes. I think the assessment that it is right now, the revised assessment, it is pretty accurate. I'm okay with it.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. I mean, initially when I looked at the assessment, I had the same thought, but again, the county didn't have the benefit of the 2020 information. But upon receipt of that, I think that they were more than fair in the revised figures to come up with the NOI, lower than that, especially based on the performance. Because had it been as high, I probably would be arguing that, we don't have 3 years of that. But I think the county was fair on this. So I don't know, anybody else, Mr. Metzger or Ms. Hogan?
I agree. I'm fine with the revised number. I think they did a good job of that.
All right. All right, then I will motion to accept the county's revised assessment of $15,135,500.
A second.
Okay, and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is unanimous, 5-0. The revised assessment of $15,135,500 has been confirmed. Thank you, Mr. Giddings.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Can we, Mr. Michael Butler?
Yes.
Yes, he's here.
Okay, you can turn on microphone. There we go. And then I believe I saw him come in here. Nope, he seems to be back out again. Do we have Mr. Yates?
He logged on, but he seems to be, he seems to be off.
Okay, well, we'll proceed then again without Mr. Yates on this and just with the 5 of us. Okay, so the second case on the agenda is RPC 1405036. Property is located at 900 North Stewart Street. We have Mr. Michael Butler representing the owner. Mr. Butler, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property, sir.
Great. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for your time. The property is a 435 unit multifamily building located at Stewart Street. It was built in 1997, and it has roughly about 5,400 square feet of commercial space. Our appeal today relates specifically just to the residential component, not to the commercial piece of it. In the memorandum that was circulated, what I'd like to describe is the state of the rental cycle that happened last year. So if you turn to page 78, the last page of the document, on that document details what were the existing leases and new leases, and what was the relet pace, as well as the rates that were obtained. And you can see, starting in January all the way through December, you started to see a precipitous drop off starting in June in terms of the rental rates. Starting out the year, we had new leases going at $22.56, and by the end of December, you can see that our average rates face rates were 1911, with the concessions reflected in the secondary column there. So that would be for new leases. On renewals, what you're seeing is fundamentally just a fall off in the pace of renewals. What you'll see is in the number of leases that were obtained throughout the period, we're averaging anywhere from 10 to 20 leases in that cycle, ultimately dropping off to single digits later in the year, because what was happening were renewals were then essentially becoming new leases at that pace. The rates were just substantially lower, and so people just weren't renewing. They were signing new leases. So our appeal today basically is associated with the rents that were applied as of the valuation date of January 1 of 2020. In jumping back to the memo on page 3, you'll see where the worksheet that the county put together underlined the various assessments and operations throughout the period. Our understanding was that that for the 2020 cycle, that there would be a reevaluation of what was going to be included in the income and expense statements, because as demonstrated, the drop in rents took place basically in the second half of the year. So while our operating statement reflects essentially a beginning first 6 months, basically we hadn't seen that drop in the rent, and so it wasn't impacted into our income and expense statement. Our position is basically we should use the rents that are in place as of the valuation date to determine the fair market value. In the county's test columns, which are columns F1 and 2, what you can see is they've gone through and reevaluated their numbers using fundamentally the rental rates that we think are more in line with what is the fair market value for the property. And if you compare that to our revised appeal pro forma, the last 2 columns, we come within basically less than a percentage difference in terms of our BOE pro forma. So our proposal is that we get a number that's more realistic to the true fair market value assessment as of the January 1 date.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
Okay,
Thank you very
thank you,
much.
sir. Okay, Mr. Chikas for the county.
Yes, ma'am. Again, as described, Mr. Butler, well-functioning high-rise apartment revenue has been up 3 years in a row, approximately 2.3% in 2020. Retail revenue is also up 3 years in a row. Gross potential is up 3 years in a row, just shy of 1.8%, 1.7% in 2020. The effective gross was down, as you can see, and this will be a theme that you'll hear throughout the year. Obviously, this property was not able to escape the effects of the COVID pandemic. The true vacancy jumped approximately 5%, and concessions also went up just shy of 3%. But this is a bit of an anomaly in the sense that this was a very stabilized property. In fact, the vacancy and concessions were dropping in the years previous. Operating expenses were down about 4.4%, second year of a decline in operating expenses, both in 19 and in 20. And again, the net operating income was down in 2020 by about 6.8%, but again, mostly due to the increase in vacancy and concessions. As we noted, there was a 4.8% increase in 18 and about a 6.4% increase in 19. Again, pointing to stabilized property that just was not able to escape the effect of the COVID pandemic in 2020. We did test the new information that was received by the appellant, and as noted, if you look on page 4 of the packet, you'll see our test worksheet that, as Mr. Butler noted, essentially mirrors what was going on with the new leases in place at the end of the year. As the board is familiar, if there's a test that does not indicate a change of over 3% from the original January 1st assessment. We do not offer revision. Again, as Mr. Butler noted, we are quite close in regards to overall change. It's just a matter of, again, a policy the board, the department has in regards to changing the January 1 assessment if it is within 3%. As again, you can see in the test column, did due diligence. We did note that there would be an approximate change to the department revenue, but overall, it was still an increase to the effective gross. Our operating expenses are very much in line with what's gone on at the property. In fact, it was almost $100,000 increase over what was incurred at the property in 2020. And yet still, this did not call for a revision. That being said, we do believe the property should be confirmed at $189,529,400. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, questions from board members? No? All right, Mr. Chicas, is there anything else you need to tell us?
No, it's again, without beating that drum, it's a well-functioning property. Revenues up across the board, apartment, retail, gross potential. They just were hit by the pandemic. In this case, the vacancy went up, the concessions went up. We don't believe that that's going to be a factor that will stay for years to come. It's been well run. We expect the concessions and vacancy to burn off. We're close on revenue. It's just a matter of, again, not being with having more than 3% change to the original. So we do believe the original should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Butler, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
I think using the historical numbers is probably inaccurate in the sense that it's really a fair market value determination as of the 1/1 date, which in an appraisal method, you would use the in-place rents. Recognizing that there were some increases in the past years, the face rents that are in place at this point in time that were demonstrated on the chart show that there was a reduction in value. We don't expect that change to be a revision to take place in the near future, and even to the point where face rents even today remain at basically a 2275 level. So we're 6 months into the new year and we're still at this same face rent.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, it's just among the board members. What's everybody think? Mr. Metzger.
I thought the test was really good. It reflected, and again, I'm focusing specifically on the apartments. I thought it was really good, really reflective of the current, the most current and the recent past. And it also confirmed my intuition that even very nice luxury apartments like this were not booming last year, but we're not being slaughtered either. And the test results show about a 2% increase, which intuitively, but again, based on the numbers on the I&E, seems to be an appropriate increase for this kind of property. Not much, but not savaged. And I would support the test results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. In the closing comment that the appellant just made, not to look at historical, I think that that's incorrect. I think that that's the way that we do look at assessments. And the fact that this past year certainly was an anomaly from a standpoint of, as you said, Mr. Metzkin, a lot of properties having issues as a fallout from the COVID. I think the test column, is more than fair. When you look at it, it's really pretty much right in line with the appellant. And I know the county has the 3% rule, but I think that the test number is really more indicative of what the value of the property is as of today. So I too would support that. Others? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I thought the test was very accurate. And I think, I know the county has this policy, but, if it went up by 3%, I think the county would have made the change. But if it goes down by 3%, they don't. And so I think from, a fairness and equity, I think we should go to the test figure.
Well, I will say, I agree that we should go to it, but if it went up, the county cannot increase it without an appraisal. So that's not actually a true statement that you just made.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant if the assessment had gone up. I don't mean today.
Right. Okay, any other comments? No?
No, I'm okay with it also. This is Jose. I'm okay with it. I think the revised assessment is more than fair. And like you said, we do look at past information and the current income and all the expenses. And I think, yeah, the revision is more than fair.
Right, because in comparison, excuse me, if next year everybody bounces back and all the numbers, are increased, we certainly wouldn't just take a blip on the screen and look at the increased numbers and say, oh, we've got to raise everybody. So I think the historical information is important.
Right.
All right, well, that being said, then I will move. I'm going to accept the county's test column, but it's actually a reduction to 184,875,400.
I'll second.
Okay. A motion and a second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's 6-0. The county's test column of 180,875,400 has been confirmed.
Thank you, board members. Thank you, Mr. Butler.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, and I believe we saw earlier Ms. Roskin was on and also Mr. Viola.
Yes, they are.
There he is. Okay, we've got everybody already. Moving along to the third case on the agenda, it is RPC 18014-331. The property is located at 1220 North Fillmore Street, and Mr. Andrew Viola is here to speak on behalf of the property. Mr. Viola, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Thank you. Our property is Station Square, located in Clarendon, between Fillmore and Garfield, fronting on Clarendon Boulevard. This is our third year in a row to appear before you, and this shouldn't take long. I'll just tell you a brief history of how that came to be. Back in 2019, commercial condominiums were given a cap rate of 4%. We came in and appealed that and successfully had it increased to 6.25%. Then in 2020, remotely last summer, we again appealed, disputing the 6.25 cap rate. Our rationale, which we've been disputing back in 2019 and again in 2020, which we are again presenting our concern today, is that we have no difference in terms of our commercial property, whether it be a commercial property or a commercial condominium. And but this year we came armed with a little better information, which is we ascertained that there were other condominiums in the county that were being treated as commercial properties. So their cap rate was 7.3, not 6.55. So we presented that to the department and said, hey, what's the deal here? And they said, well, matter of fact, it was Lori. She told me, look, well, that's a larger economic unit. Sometimes we do that in the county. I said, well, I'm a little confused here because our economic unit is about 50,000 square feet. And she said, well, yeah, but you have individual income and expense reports. I said, well, why does that make a difference? She said, well, and after some discussion, she said, look, if you were to condense it to one income and expense report, we could look at it as a commercial property as opposed to a condominium. Nobody said this to me 3 years ago. We've been paying these higher taxes based upon assessments that are based upon a yield on a cap rate of 6.25. Now this year 6.55, and that's really the crux of our concern here. You're not the first department to not tell people things. It's like, if you able to ferret it out and figure it out and then approach them, they'll say, well, yeah, we can look at that. I've had it happen in the building inspections department. So it's something that I've found in the county. If you don't ask the right question, and even when you do, they're not going to give you helpful information. So that's why, and I honestly suggest we just look at all three of these cases the same way. And what I'm simply asking is, look, I've already gotten hammered 2 years because I didn't know I could consolidate them into an income and expense report, and in turn have a 0.8 increase in the cap rate. See, so I'm just saying, look, I already got hammered 2 years. Is there any way? I'm absolutely next year we're going to do it with the consolidated income and expense report. But it just seems unfair that nobody gave us the information, and here we are. And I'm not refuting the income, the expenses, or anything. I'm just saying, look, why 6.55 when frankly we're a commercial property? I don't occupy all this as an owner. So, and I rent it all out. That's what we do. I mean, Bush rents part of it. That's who I work for. But we're a tenant just like every other one with a third party lease. That's my presentation.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Roskin for the county.
Thank you. So this property is a commercial condominium, and the other property that Mr. Viola is referring to is the Eclipse. Yes, we do. That's the only other commercial property out of the approximately 270 in the county that we use a higher cap rate. And the purpose of using the higher cap rate is that it's under one ownership, yes, and its net leasable area is substantially larger than the other commercial condominiums in the county. I think it's at about, give me a second, it's, I think it's 81 or 80 some thousand square feet, net leasable area, excuse me. And so because of its sheer size, we use a different cap rate for that one. As for this particular property, there are a total of 9 commercial condominium units in this building. Not all of them are owned by Mr. Viola, okay? And when we appraised this condominium project, or the commercial units, I applied the same rental rate, the same stabilization vacancy, the same expenses, and the same cap rate of 6.55% to all of them, okay? Mr. Viola did appeal a couple of other properties besides these 3. And so they're all being treated equally, okay? And otherwise, we believe that the current cap rate of 6.55 is fair. As for the economic unit, we don't, years past, many years ago, we went ahead and we created economic units, but we had owners complain about that. So we don't automatically create economic units. As for me trying to keep up with calling owners and saying, hey, can we, if we have the conversation, then we do. So we started having a conversation this year with Mr. Viola about creating an economic unit for the year 2022. So that's pretty much it for my presentation.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members?
Can I say something, Mary, since we still have
yes, you still have time. Yes, sir.
All right. Sorry about that. I think another thing we want to point out is when you look at the information provided for these cases, particularly the summary sheet, you'll see that our projected NOI is much less than what these properties have actually achieved. And so the argument being made is mainly about the cap rate, but we think the board should focus also on the net operating income of this property. Because if you were to take, for example, on the parcel ending in 328, you divide that by the 0.073 cap rate, you actually have a higher value than what the actual assessment is. When you're looking at their actual net operating income, our income is consistently lower on all three other parcels in Lori's summary sheet. And I think that's something that's kind of being glossed over because of the difference in cap rate argument. Also, when we first switched to the income approach for commercial condos, it was because we had received income and expense information for these condo properties. These condo properties were originally in residential neighborhoods. So if there was if there's residential condos, there is a neighborhood number, usually like 310294, something like that. The commercial components were part of those neighborhoods. And since they were part of those neighborhoods, they were actually valued off a per market approach. And since we didn't have any sales of these commercial condos, oftentimes the assessments were increased along with the residential condo units, or unfortunately, some were just rolled over because of the lack of commercial sales. And we didn't want to treat those the same as residential units. It was really oftentimes based off the appraiser. To try to clean up that process, we removed all the commercial condos from the residential neighborhoods and put them in their own commercial condo neighborhood. We began to look at commercial condo sales last year, and I think the year before last, so 19 and 20, we presented the board with commercial condo sales that we had. We received more commercial condo sales in 2020 that I think Lori could have spoke about that are in the commercial guidelines. And these commercial sales, when you look at so we have 4 commercial condo sales from December 2019 to December 2020. The assessment to sales ratio is 91%, 100%, 93%, and 84%. So along with these sales that we have, again, we looked at publications to see if they had any information about commercial condo sales. Sites such as CoStar, they may or may not have information because they usually report on sales that hit a certain threshold as far as dollar value. So they may or may not have the information. But when we did see the information, we did try to utilize what they provided to assist us in developing this cap rate for commercial condos. So I just want to give some perspective as to why we value commercial condos the way we do. We were diligent about how we went about converting these from sales comparison to income. We actually had income for several commercial condos for about 3 years before we switched to the income approach. And that was to give us more time to gather data on how we should treat these property types. In the past, Lori has pointed out that one of the things that sets commercial condos apart from a regular general commercial space, such as a standalone retail store or a 7-Eleven and fast food type restaurants, is the commercial the condo fees that they pay. That's something that we have included in our expenses for this property type, and so that's something that sets them apart from other commercial properties. With the commercial condo that is pointed out, I think it is in National Landing, that is true what Lori said. This property is about 81,000 square feet. It's owned by one owner. I think they always own all of the units, and it is all of the commercial space in that building, if I'm not mistaken. That's similar to, in our minds, to apartment buildings that have apartments above ground, apartments above retail, where they have one or several large commercial spaces that are owned by the apartment owners. And that's why we've treated that one property type similar to those. That is also something that we've discussed. Another trend that we've been seeing is that with apartments, you have developers who intend to declare these properties as, well, mixed use apartments. And they intend to declare these properties as condos. But for whatever reason, they back out of that decision. And instead of having individual condo units, they create one large condo unit for the apartments. And then they create a condo unit for the commercial space. And they operate the building as an apartment building. That is something that we're seeing. And those properties are being treated the same as mixed use apartments and the same as the property out in National Landing with the 81,000 square feet of retail space. Again, Lori did have a conversation with Mr. Viola about creating a economic unit for these properties. I think in the past, one of the reasons that conversation wasn't had is because there are several other commercial condo units in this development that were sold off. And I guess off of assumptions, it was, we believe that the units that Mr. Viola owns will be sold off individually as well. So that's why the economic unit conversation didn't come up.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, this is for the county. Is the term economic unit defined?
Defined, it's
In the
just,
county ordinance or in your regulations? Is it defined?
No, I don't think it's in the county ordinance. It's essentially an economic unit is a group of parcels that are valued together and operated together. It can come in different shapes and forms. You can have an apartment building with 2 vacant lots attached to it for density support. And so we value those 3 as economic units because the 2 lots support the other lot. And a building that sits on 2 lots, so therefore that's an economic unit. It's really just a grouping of economic parcels that are valued as 1 unit.
So the fact that Bush has sold off 1 or 2 condos, why is that relevant to the creation of an economic unit?
Because it speaks to, in the beginning when this project was built, just like the residential units were sold off individually, that's the activity that was happening at this property type. And we were anticipating that being continuing in the future. And Mr. Viola still retains the economic units that he still retains the parcels that he retains and he operates them. So that's why we had this conversation.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Yates.
Following up on that to the county, if he does as he's suggesting he will do for next year, look at this as a unit and do the accounting, change to the accounting, will the county look at this differently? Will they look at the cap rate differently?
Go ahead, Lori.
for these particular parcels.
Yeah.
And when they're assembled together, I believe it does come out to a substantially larger net leasable area. And I believe that we were under the notion that we would treat it like the other retail, that just like the Eclipse or the other retail properties. I'm trying to think of another one, but I can't think of it offhand. But the other retail properties, that's a group as a whole, the large size within a apartment complex.
So the net leasable area will change, and you would expect also then the cap rate would be changing too.
I think that's something that, again, we as we told Mr. Viola, that's something that we'll look at when it's treated as an economic unit. It gives us a little bit more leeway to compare it to other properties that are either economic units or just large. Because the one in National Landing is an economic unit. So when it's an economic unit, it gives us a little bit more leeway to treat it as such. Because one of the questions that I think comes up, and Lord may have asked it, is, do you treat all of these parcels as one economic unit yourself? Because that's also the difference that sets these properties apart from the economic units we look at, mainly the one that was pointed out in National Landing. These are reported and treated as one property. They're not treated as multiple properties that I own and therefore I want to put together. Like, that's one of the differences. It's not just about how we view the properties, it's also about how the owners view the properties, and that's why we don't create economic units on our own without having these conversations.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Mr. Penaranda.
Mr. Bailey, isn't the difference here that these are individual condominium units as opposed to some other parcels that are, combined together?
Yes, these are individual condo units owned by one person, whereas the other ones are multiple parcels treated as one business unit.
Okay, Mr. Metzgen, you had a question?
I had a question, excuse me, about operating expenses. I see that the appellant, that traditionally expenses have been quite low as a percentage of NOI, of EGI, and it went up a lot in 2021, both in absolute dollars and as percentage. And the department followed that and didn't increase it quite as much, being conservative. But still, given that we like stabilized over time numbers, the department's, again, in column D, total operating expenses at 20% is much more than the average 5.2 or 3% that was reported in past years. Can you, again, but lower than what the appellant suggested for 2021, but it still seems way out of whack, 4 times the historical amount. Could you speak to how you feel comfortable that it should go up as in dollars by about 4 times from what the historical achievement were?
Okay. So first of all, when we determined the expenses, we were looking at all of the units within that project. And this is now keep in mind, some of the units are retail and some of the units are office. So you might vary, okay? Different retail units, like if they're a restaurant, they're going to probably have higher expenses than versus the office, okay? And so with this particular project, Station Square, all of the condo units, we looked at all of those and we came up with the 20% average, and we applied it to all of the units, whether they were retail or office or both. Does that explain? Is that what you were asking? And so, yes, it does look higher. In column D, our expenses at 127,000 looks more than what they're showing for column A, B, and C. But once again, when I valued all the commercial condo units within this project, I applied the same rental rate, the same vacancy, the same expenses, and the same cap rate across the board for all of them. So they all got the same thing. I
understand, but it's 4 times the historical average. Although, once again, I'll reiterate on purpose, still less than what the appellant's projecting. I get that you're treating them all the same, which makes a lot of sense.
Keep in mind there are other owners that are reporting different expenses. So their expenses that they're reporting may be something different than what Mr. Viola is reporting.
So it's the average of all condominiums, not just this appellant's condominiums.
Exactly, and he owns 5 of the units out of 9.
So everybody else must be much higher. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell Ken, with a condominium, a lot of the maintenance might be done by the condo association.
Okay, I think we'll keep that for our comments, but okay, are there any other questions for the appellant or the county? Okay, Ms. Roskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Okay, thank you. So once again, I want to explain that this is not an economic unit, but yes, we did apply the same rental rate, expense rate, stabilized vacancy, and cap rate across all 9 units within the condo project. And Mr. Viola, he's only got 3 here that he's arguing before the board today. He actually owns a total of 5. And so the other 2 we're using the same expense rate, the same cap that you see within column D. Okay, and we just ask that you accept the 2021 assessment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Viola, if you would take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Sure. I think what's being lost here is the fact, yes, we developed this as an 80,000 square foot commercial condominium, retail and office. We made the decision in 2008. So this has been this way for 13 years. And to say, well, they might be thinking about selling another unit. I mean, obviously, that's not the case. We put a mortgage on the portion of the property we own. So it is indeed an economic unit of approximately 50,000 square feet with, 190 parking spaces. That's what we finance. We don't have, obviously we can't finance the other condos. The only other thing I would say is that, their expenses shouldn't vary much from ours. Somebody said the condo, yes, we manage it. As Lori knows, we charge $18,000 a year. Ken, you're in real estate. Normally a management fee would be $150,000. We've had bids. That's why I do it. And I do everything in this project that costs, which is why our expenses are exceedingly low. That's it.
Okay, thanks to both of you. It's just among the board. I'll go ahead and start. I look at this and I can see, where the appellant is coming from. However, I believe it was Mr. Bailey that said, I hope the NOI is not being glossed over here. And I'm concerned about the NOI because here's where I sit on this. Even if you went to the appellant's cap rate, the NOI that he's using, 509, I mean, that's ridiculous when you look at the performance of the property. So I did my own test since the county didn't present a test, but I did my test and said, if I average the 4 years of NOI, I come out with 574, 944. And at 7.3% cap rate, that caps out at 7.875, which is higher than the current assessment. If you take a 3-year and throw out 2017, it caps out at 7.983. And if you just take the operating year of 2020, it caps out at 8.2 million. So to be honest with you, I think the assessment of the 7.775 is low from where I'm sitting. I'd be interested in seeing what other people think, but I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too and have a low NOI and then bump the cap rate up. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mary. And I took the operating year and I got over 8 million. Here's what I would suggest to the county, however, if you're going to apply a different cap rate to an economic unit versus something that's not an economic unit, I think you better define what an economic unit is. Because, here we have a taxpayer who's making this argument and the county, it's kind of up to the total unlimited discretion of the county whether this is an economic unit or not. So I would strongly urge the county to either not change cap rates based on whether it's an economic unit or come up with a definition that is supportable. But as to this particular appeal, I recognize what Mr. Viola is saying, and I think he's made a fair point. But just like Mary pointed out, the actuality is it's probably even worth more than it's assessed for.
And I would just jump in on the economic unit. there is a universal definition of that. If you Google it, go look it up. It's under law, it's under appraisal practice, it's under economics. It's a collection of parcels that are under common ownership and operation. And we've seen other cases where the county has said, you should come to us and move parcels in under and make an economic unit. So I think the county is very proactive from a standpoint of trying to consolidate and give people the opportunity. I mean, I think that they need to go through and see whether they can manually do that themselves. No, some people don't want them combined. So it is pretty defined what an economic unit is.
I think, Mary, a group of condominium units, commercial or otherwise, are a little bit different than real property, because some of the economic units, what could have been done is a deconsolidation, but sometimes owners don't want to do that because they don't want to lose vested lots or something like that. So I think that maybe the definition ought to be a little more clear for commercial condos.
Right, and I agree with you. As I said, some folks don't want them combined, but I mean, the county's been very open to, in the past, as far as I can recall, of anybody wanting to put parcels into an economic unit and have them assessed and taxed that way. So, okay, other comments? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, I think that, like Barnes said, I think the main difference is that these are condominium units. And, we've seen before, there may be a building that, all the 100 units in the building are all condominium units, but they're operated as apartments. We are not going to be assessing everything as an apartment building just one unit. Each condominium unit is going to be assessed separately. So I think that's the main difference in this case, that these are condominium units, and I think they're assessed properly. And like you said, the NOI shows the value, and I think it's there.
Okay.
Mr.
Matzkin.
I'll just register this quickly, taking off from what Barnes started to talk about in the Q&A session, that most of by definition, most of the expenses is the condo fee. What's in addition to that are utilities paid by individual residents or owners, but that of course is accounted for separately in the I&Es. So when I want to do a mea culpa, when I talked about a fourfold increase from historical to what the appellant projects for 2021, I was looking at the wrong condominium. I was looking at the smallest of the three. But they're all very, very, very much the same. And I see the other two, it's actually a doubling or so of historical, which just mystifies me, given how the overwhelming part, the overwhelming creation of cost is the condo fee. And of course, all units are treated equally based on the square footage in terms of the condo fee. So I'm a little at a loss to understand why there's such big differences in expenses, and I'm not going to solve it here, but it drives me to support, therefore, the county's assessment. One last thing, it seems to me that economic units ought to have perhaps different legal pieces integrally related to the main business, and we've seen that many times historically in Shirlington, a storage facility where they had different lots for parking and for this warehouse and that warehouse, but they all were used for the same purpose, that one business. Right. Clearly here, that's not the case. I would also extend that it's also not the case at the Eclipse, but they are treating those owners as one unit. So I'd be fascinated to see if the appellant comes back and lumps his together too. I wasn't compelled by the size of the economic unit, that if it's big, then it's all commercial property. If they're individual, it's condo. That's mysterious to me. So we'll revisit that next year, I guess.
Okay. Any other? No?
Yeah.
All right, then I will move to confirm the county at $7,775,700.
Second.
Motion is second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous, 6-0. The county's confirmed at $7,775,700. Does, we can move on to the 4th. Does anybody need to take a break? No? Okay, we'll move forward then on the 4th case, RPC 18014-332. The property is located at 1220 North Fillmore Street. Mr. Viola, if you would start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
We don't need 8 minutes. I at the beginning said I would suggest we just take them all collectively. So if you want to go ahead and do your vote for the other two, and I'll save you time and save me time.
Okay.
Right.
Ms. Roskin, do you have anything to add there?
No, ma'am, I do not.
All right. Are there any questions from the board members on this parcel? No. Okay, would somebody like to make a motion then?
I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the assessment at 1,793,200.
200.
I'll second.
Okay, motion to second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, the county's confirmed at 1,793,200. Final parcel is RPC 18014-328, again at 1220 North Fillmore, number 110. Any comments from either side? Additional comments to this? No?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Viola?
No,
Okay. All right. Any questions from board members on this parcel? Then we can go ahead and accept the motion on this.
I think Ken has a
Mary,
comment.
I have
I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No, it's quite all right. I'm going to ask my question. I guess it's the department. I don't understand. I alluded to this in my last comment. Why size matters? What's the difference between and I'm going to make a stab at the answer. What's the difference between the cap rates, which is a key constituent in all of this, of course, between commercial, quote, commercial properties and, quote, commercial condominiums? Why do you treat them? You alluded to size. That makes no sense to me. So please comment. Thanks.
So again, in the past, we valued these properties off a sales comparison approach, and what we saw is most of the sales were of a certain size condo unit. And so when you have a sales of 2,500 square feet, 3,000 square feet, maybe even 10,000 square feet, and we use that to assess a property that's 80,000 square feet, it resulted in large swings. So we actually began to value that unit in national landing on the income approach way before we began to value the smaller individual units. And what we did was compare it again to mixed use apartment buildings. And so that general commercial guideline was always attached to that unit out in national landing because it was, from a comparable standpoint, the smaller condo units in the county, I mean, we just didn't believe they were sufficient and it was accurate for us to use those as comps. So it's from an equity standpoint.
So they're bite size and they can, there's more of a market for small pieces than for something very large. And so the prices reflect that. Is that right?
Basically, yeah. I mean, because the price per square foot was much higher on the smaller units. And so then again, when we value those price per square foot from the sales and then applied it to the 80,000 square foot unit, it just created larger swings in value for their property.
So the analogy is like pricing residential land. Each square foot of land is worth less than the prior one. So apparently the appellant's on the right track and ought to agglomerate all this for next year. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? The only thing else I'll throw out here is all three of these assessments, the NOI was far lower than the reportable income in most cases for the historical as well as, you know, the operating year 2020. So
Well, that really says by discounting or by operating this as the manager at a much lower rate than in the market, he's hurting himself on that NOI and the expenses.
Mm-hmm.
May I have my 2 minutes on this one?
Well, actually, it's 1 minute and.
All right, I'm sorry.
No, you can.
I know, but I didn't get the 1 minute on the last one. No, I'll make it very quick. As I mentioned early on, we operate them very tightly. So our expenses are low, and in all fairness to the county, they look more globally. And Lori's had this pointed conversation with me that, like I said, we charge $1,500 a month and anybody else would charge, $15,000. But that's how we operate. It's a great deal for the few owners, and certainly it means our income that we pass through to our owners our partners is better. That's it.
Okay. All right, so it's just among the board members. Go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Brown.
that's a good explanation, and that makes it look a little bit better as far as the expenses. But yeah, I agree with you. I think these are all 3 units that, in my opinion, they're a little bit underassessed. But because doing my own testing, I came up with a value also of about 2.8 some. So I'm okay with the assessment the way it is.
All right. All right, then with no further discussion, then I will move to confirm the county at $2,693,800.
I'll second that.
Okay, a second with Mr. Penaranda. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. County's confirmed on this as well. $2,693,800. Thank you, Mr. Viola.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, any other business from board members or the county? I just have one thing. It's very simple. On case 2 today, the comparison grid, because it was so long and it had so many columns in it, it cut off. We were fortunate in that the appellant wasn't talking about the retail, but as we know, it opens up everything, so it could have come in. So I don't know what we're going to do, but either it needs to go on 2 pages or it needs to have a second page that's got the other half of it. But because as we're flipping through, it's kind of nice to have it all together. So that's the only thing. I don't know how. I mean, if it gets too much smaller, luckily we can all make it larger on our computer screens, but just to kind of make sure if that happens where it's a column that we really are using, it could be a problem in the hearings.
Okay. In a situation like that, would you want us to do the operating history on the first page and then say the assessment and the remaining information on the last page, so that way everything flows better? That
way it just flows, and you can kind of, we could all like print one of them out and have the other one.
Okay.
But like I said, we were lucky because he wasn't arguing the retail, but I know a lot of times I was expecting someone to say, hey, well, when you appeal, it opens up all avenues. So it could have feasibly gone that way, but the information was cut off. So I just am trying to hedge my bets for the future, that in case that is, it comes up and it is an issue, that would be really helpful. Okay. Sure, Mr. Matzkin.
I'll add to that because I've complained about this before.